Hello, everyone. We are back, and I have a very special guest with me this time. We are talking with Raphael Parry. Let me go this way. Raphael Parry on my screen, who is the executive and artistic director at Shakespeare Dallas. And Raphael, it's so great to have you. I would have to think that of all the people in the area, there are very few people who think about Shakespeare on a daily basis as much as you do. And so your experience, particularly with just the tangible aspects of putting Shakespeare on the stage, I think is going to be very valuable to the students. And I'm wearing the shirt
I saw
today.
that.
Yes,
Thank you. The brand looks great. Brand new brand.
I know it looks so great. And the website is shakespearedallas.org. I'll try to say it at least 3 or 4 more times because I do think that while we read Shakespeare and we study Shakespeare, there's just nothing compared to actually seeing a performance on the stage.
Completely agree. And an interesting side note, the Elizabethans used to read their plays out loud because there was such an oral culture that it was too difficult just to sit and read it. So they would read the language out loud. And I think that's when it really comes to life.
Oh, absolutely. And it's that idea that yeah, it can even become kind of an event where everyone gathers together to do a little bit of reading through it.
Right. Yes.
So today we're talking a little bit about the characters that Shakespeare created.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I kind of wanted to start off with is just asking you, what can writers learn today from Shakespeare when it comes to creating compelling characters?
So, such a great question. I think what made Shakespeare genius was the flaws that he would give all his characters. So even in the earliest comedies, and he got more and more complex as his writing progressed through the middle period of his life, and then the romance pieces at the end. Each character, for the most part, down to if they had a name, then they usually had some kind of whole character. And within that character, either a comedy or a tragedy, there was some major flaw that they had that would interfere or break their process in the pursuit of what they wanted. And I have a dear playwright friend that always talks about how Shakespeare breaks things over and over. So things are going down a track and the character is getting what they want, and then something breaks and that character flaw comes into play. And all of a sudden tension rises. And then the rest of the play is about how to solve it, whether they solve it or they die, or in the comedies, they usually live, but they go through some kind of major crux or crises before they can get the resolution. And I think in the tragedies in particular, there's always this, obviously hubris is a major character flaw for our main characters. But there are other smaller things too. I mean, I'm thinking about Othello right now, and his irrational fear, just his irrational jealousy is what drives that plot of that play. And Iago's ability to get in his ear and plant those seeds, and then he doesn't believe anything, even though his wife Desdemona is completely saying, "I am not a whore. I am completely devoted to you." He can't. Othello, great general, brilliant leader. But that green-eyed monster is what destroys him eventually. So at least with the great plays, I find that Shakespeare always builds in these major character flaws that trip them up. And as actors or directors, we lean into those flaws. We try to uncover them and try to figure out, is it arrogance? Is it pridefulness that makes them fall down? Is it greed? Is it, thinking about Shylock, or there's a combination of greed and pride. He wants his money back. He's very principled, but that principle of saying, "I lend you the money, you must give me the pound of flesh," creates his downfall in the end, in what many people call a comedy. Very sad ending for that guy.
It is.
But I guess that's what when I'm directing or thinking about Shakespeare, I try to ferret out, what is the major flaw of that character? How can we amplify it? What in the plot leads them to what did Shakespeare do to kind of lead him to the place where the play breaks and that character has a crisis and then has to find some resolution in it?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight into Shakespeare. This idea that one of the things I love about Shakespeare is he doesn't always feel the need to explain every character. So there's this gappiness to the character where we don't know, we don't have like the backstory of Othello on why he is so hung up, like he does not want to be made a fool of. Like we don't know,
Right.
like, was it his dad, his mom, was there something with
Right.
his child? And that really gives the actor and the director an opportunity to kind of explore, all right, we know that he's this way, but we can kind of really interpret that and kind of work with it how we want.
Yeah, we talk a lot about textual evidence. So sometimes when I'm working with an actor that's trained in method acting, which is, doing a bunch of deep research, writing biographies of their characters, and then I'll have to go back and say, what is the textual evidence? What does Shakespeare say about the character? What does the character say about himself or themselves? What do other characters say about him? That's all we have. So
Yeah.
take that information, and that's the story of that character. And that within that, you have all the evidence you need to make your choices, and because it's pretty much there. I mean, Shakespeare did write that into the play. It was actually Uta Hagen, a great modern American teacher of acting, who kind of said, what is the character? She also included the line about what does the playwright say about the character, but Shakespeare didn't say anything. It's up to you to figure it out, by the way he wrote and the way he developed plays with his company. But I like that fact. I like that it's a blank canvas to a certain degree. There's no biography going backward that you could lean on, the modern psychological, how was he raised, etc. It doesn't matter unless it's referred to in the text.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And another question I had is, when we're talking about characters, is it helpful, or is it better maybe even to think of characters in terms of ensemble? That a character is only a character in relation to the other characters on stage. Like, what is Macbeth without Lady Macbeth? Like, what
It's
is...
a really great point. Yeah, no, absolutely. He's writing in, he is writing, it's a great point. Like, that's a perfect example. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, they both have ambition, but Macbeth wants to stay on the straight and narrow. He's already conquered many battles. He's been rewarded by Duncan, given elevation to the new, he gets elevated to a new title.
Yeah.
But Lady Macbeth says, that's not enough. We need to have it all. Yeah. And he's very circumspect about doing it. She convinces him through those wonderfully dramatic monologues about, screw your courage to the sticking place. If we fail, we fail. And she compliments him in that way. And then again, it breaks, right? He goes so far in his ambition, he starts killing so many people, and then he begins to ignore her. He suffers. And this might be one of those weird character things that I love about Shakespeare. Shakespeare gives him insomnia. He can't sleep anymore. He wants to sleep, but he can't sleep. And that sleep deprivation starts making him crazy. And then we end up with the crazy guy at the very end who's battling it out with Macduff. And he's been told by the prophecies that, he can't be killed unless it's of a person not woman born. Yeah. All the force comes from Dunsinane. It's and then all the prophecies come true, and he dies.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, I just think, like, you as a director, I would imagine that part of your job, each actor is kind of thinking about their character, but you have to see how they all fit together on that stage.
Right.
And in many ways, for the writers that are taking this class, they're not just writing one character, they're writing a whole cast of characters, and they have to figure out, how do they all fit together?
It's a great point. One of the biggest challenge we have as directors is trying to figure out what I would call the mise en scène. What is the setting of the entire piece? And then what is the world of that play that we're creating? Because, we could do anything in Shakespeare, but giving that the rules of the universe is kind of the way I just described it to my actors. Like, is it a mechanical society? Is it a non-mechanical society? Do we have options to have firearms? No. Oh, then we fight hand to hand. So creating those kind of rules of the universe helps create this setting for the play. Then the actors have the characters have a playground to work within, that's kind of defined, if that makes sense. And I think that's super important in writing too. Like, you can't introduce an element that wasn't embedded early on, and all of a sudden it's an O. Henry device that it just pops up at the very end, like, He's got a ray gun. He kills him. Wait, what? We're in the Old West right now. That's a bad analogy, saying an O. Henry device, but
let's go with it.
Okay. But I do think, like, you're right, to talk about the ensemble, to talk about the body of characters in the play. There are some Shakespeare plays that are interesting, like Winter's Tale is one, which is truly bifurcated. The first act the first section deals with a tyrannous kind of man who is super jealous of his wife, who's younger, sees her touching another king, they're dancing. Then he decides to challenge her that she's an adulteress carrying his child. And the only through line there is she gives birth to the child. The cruel king sends the baby off to die on an island. And then we get transferred to a whole different world where the baby is born and raised. And it's a kind of a completely different setting. And then we bring some of those people from Bohemia, where they go to Bohemia, back to the court 27 years later. And then there's this crazy intermixing of the Bohemians with the court. Hermione, who's we thought was dead, comes back alive she's a statue, and then she comes to life again. So even Shakespeare was breaking conventions like crazy towards the end, which I delight in.
Yeah. Well, and even they talk about the so-called problem plays.
Yes.
But to me, that is Shakespeare kind of playing with the form. Like he's
totally
really
agree.
Just trying to say, okay, let's play with time in this one. Let's see what we can do with time, and let's jump forward, or let's really have fun. Even with, was it Comedy of Errors, where we have the twins?
Yes, there's two sets of twins.
Yeah. Let's play with doubling. Let's see how much fun we can have with doubling, and let's crank it up a little bit.
Right. So he took a Greek model of a twins separated at birth and said, I'll compound it and I'll have two sets of twins, both separated at birth in a shipwreck. And I just love his devices. Like shipwreck plays into so many of his plays.
Yes.
And I didn't really think about it until now. Of course, that would be one of the major forms of transportation, but one that not everybody knew about. If you were in England, not everybody got on a ship and went across the ocean. So he kind of uses his imagination to kind of explore what's that like, going to these different islands. Or Tempest pops in my mind right now because it's like the only Shakespeare play that doesn't have any real foundation in some previous story, if that makes sense. So Shakespeare was an inveterate thief. He literally stole storylines from everywhere, from Greek literature to contemporaries that were writing 10 years before him. But his genius was taking those storylines and plots and amping them up, doubling them, or adding delightful new characters like Mercutio added to Romeo and Juliet from a storyline developed by an Italian writer from 200 years before. So Shakespeare was genius at robbing and then adding to and accentuating to make the story even more profound.
Oh, and I think it's great that you brought up Romeo and Juliet, because when you think about ensemble, I was just thinking about Romeo. It seems like he's got his crew of friends. He's got Mercutio, he's got Benvolio. They're thick as thieves. They're always together. But then I think the reason why, and I'm presuming here, but I think the reason why Shakespeare does that is because then we contrast that with how alone Juliet is.
That is a great point. Yeah.
She just has the nurse.
Right. That's a great point of contrast. And that's another great thing about Shakespeare is he's contrasting these two young lovers who seem seemingly very alike. But you're right. Romeo's got this whole crew he runs with, and Juliet's got nothing except nurse. Yeah. Not even a mention of anybody else in her friend group or anything like that. And we see Juliet as kind of a iconic solitary figure. And Romeo, we're given to believe, is in a bit of a Lothario. He's got this girl and this girl before, and this one didn't work out, that one didn't work out. But a sense of purity in Juliet, another contrast that Romeo's been dilly-dallying around, but Juliet's been very, very straight and very composed. I always think of Juliet as like the adult in the relationship. She's the only one with reason. It's Romeo that screws up so much, that keeps making mistakes, which is another contrast of a very settled and logical person in Juliet and a very impulsive person in Romeo.
Yeah, and that ensemble doesn't work if Romeo is played as being a organized adult who has a clear understanding of the world. No, he comes in a hot mess.
Right, and stays a hot mess. And one of the reasons Mercutio dies is because Romeo gets in the way in the fight between him and Tybalt, and Mercutio, realizing that Romeo caused his death, sends a plague not only on Tybalt's house, but a plague on Romeo's house too. His last lines are, "A plague on both your houses." It's I see the lovely balances here and the contrasts, and it's even opening my eyes about the plays we're working on currently. And I'm working on Midsummer Night's Dream right now as preparing to produce it.
Which
And
I think in an earlier conversation that was unrecorded, I told you that I played Nick Bottom in Midsummer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Greatest role ever if you're a comedian.
I love Nick Bottom. Yes.
Yeah, very fun. And I'm going to go back to an early practice of doubling almost all the characters in the play, because there's so many mirrors in Midsummer, which I don't know if that's interesting to your students as well, but early Shakespeare companies would double Titania and Hippolyta, the Athenian queen and the fairy queen, Theseus and Oberon, again, the Athenian king and the fairy king. But the rustics, who are the laborers who put on the play within a play, were often doubled with the fairies. So there's all of these parallels that Shakespeare's writing that kind of become beautifully, it's a beautiful ensemble if you want to cast it that way. And again, this idea of mirrors, there's so many mirrors, especially in Midsummer, of what's happening in the court is being mirrored in the fairyland. All this things that are happening in the court, this kind of fracture is also happening with Titania and Oberon and the fairies, because Oberon wants that changeling child so badly, and Titania doesn't want to give it up until they could settle up on that item right there. Then there's going to be chaos in the weather, everything else.
Yeah. And once again, for the writers, I think it's important to see like that mirroring quality there. That's a tool to play with. That's something that you can say, okay, what can I do here? What can I make happen? And I like the mirroring of the mechanicals with the fairies, because then it feels kind of like dream logic.
Right.
Like if I'm Nick and I'm falling asleep, and now in my dream state, I cast my friends as the fairies.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure it was partly economics for Shakespeare's company, but also
fewer paychecks.
Fewer paychecks. But I think there's some innate there's an innate logic to it, or beyond logic, innate kind of reinforcing of the themes of the play by keep adding those mirrors within it. And I love your thought that when Bottom wakes up and Peaseblossom looks a whole lot like Peter Quince, then you go, that's weird, but okay, I'll have me some peas.
Yeah, all right, works for me. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think another question: if a writer is struggling to figure out a character, and I think as a director, you are uniquely qualified to answer this question. Let's say a writer has a main character, and they can't quite crack the nut of who this person really is. And we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier. How do you help actors kind of figure out their characters? If you just notice that they're really kind of struggling to get to who this person is, what's some advice? What are some tips and tricks that you use to help actors kind of figure out? And we talked about the textual evidence.
Right.
So I guess that would be part of it.
I mean, I always go back to, as a director, asking the actor, what do you want in the scene? What does your character want? What is the most burning desire this person has? What do they want to achieve? And put the test in another character, so that I want to dominate that person. And I always invite them to say, you can't solve it within yourself. Your character cannot solve it all by yourself. The test has to be in another character, and it has to be something you need from them. And you have to decide if you get it or you don't get it. And that's like a beat or a moment in a play. And then we string all those moments together, and then you start having an arc of the play. And I always invite actors to think about their characters beginning at one location or one place, but when obviously you were talking about Aristotle's Poetics, or the natural rise, the denouement, and all that stuff. But by the time the piece is over, how have they changed? Where are they at? They're definitely not in the same place they were when they started, because they've gone through a journey of some kind. So I often have to remind actors that, don't play the end of the play too soon. Make sure you're allowing yourself to go through the journey, but also be clear where you have gone at once you finished it, how far you've traversed, if you will. And all of that is like moment by moment action. The decisions you're making about what do I want? Did I achieve it? If I didn't achieve it, what tactic am I going to use next time to get what I want? Because I didn't get it this time, I'm going to shift tactics and try something else. I hope that's applicable to writing, but that's
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as a writer, I know I've spent many late evenings kind of acting out my characters.
Sure.
And if anyone was watching me while I'm at my computer, they would think I was a little bit touched in the head, because I'm sitting there trying to like embody this character and kind of feel that character. And I think that writers spend a lot of time trying to act out those scenes. And who better than a director to kind of remind us like how that works.
And the other thing that I talk about is like, I remind actors that anything is possible in terms of, I could right now, after we finish this conversation, get in my car and go drive into a wall. I mean, it's not, I don't have suicidal or ideations of suicide or anything, but something might snap in my head and I might just go do it because I've got something that's happening to me. And I find that sometimes actors and maybe writers put limits on things. Well, they would never do that. And I'm saying, well, how do you know? I've done some wacky things in my life as a human being. Why can't that character do those things? If it's textually supported, or if it increases the tension or the action or the conflict, and it's within the boundaries of the character, then they probably can do it.
Oh, I think that's a great point. In fact, in an earlier video that I've recorded, I talk about a writer friend who had precisely that hang up where he was like, oh, this character would never do that. And I reminded him of Macbeth. I said, it makes no sense for Macbeth to kill King Duncan. Right. Absolutely no sense. Like, why would he do that? And
he has it all. Yes.
Yeah. And King Duncan has helped him. And it's like, why does he do that? Well, the why, kind of justifying the crazy action, then becomes in many ways the arc of the rest of the play, because it's like, well, there's the witches, there's Lady Macbeth, there's his own violent tendencies, there's and it all kind of leads him down that path. And so sometimes for a writer, it is beneficial to think, okay, anything's possible. If I can get this character who's really shy and meek and have them become this really loud and in charge person, I don't have to, I can take them there, and that is something that's possible.
I think that just observing, there's, this is not Shakespeare, but Stanislavski, the great Russian director, acting teacher, would say to an actor, observe everything. Your job as an artist to observe everything. And he used to coach his young actors to go outside and just be a part of life and just look at things and observe human people people just walking around doing things, because the more you observe, the more you realize the capacity of people. I mean, a perfect contemporary example would be our friends in Ukraine right now. These people you see on the news saying, I'm not a soldier, but I'm learning I'm waiting to get my gun and I'm waiting to do what I need to do. And it's like, I have to turn back to myself and say, would I pick up a gun and do that? And I'm like, yeah, I probably would. If I lived in a country that's being invaded and they called me to do it, I probably would do it.
Yeah.
So I think we do things, sometimes we limit our ideas of what humans can do or what characters can do, but pressed in the compressed situation of conflict, we can do extraordinary things or unhuman things sometimes.
Yeah. And completely acting opposite of what people expect from us. So yeah.
Right.
And that becomes an interesting story. Yeah, I completely agree. I appreciate so much your time. I do have one more question for you. And this is a hard one. This is like picking between your children here.
Oh boy.
Do you have a favorite character from Shakespeare's plays?
It is a hard one. and the reality is it changes over time.
Yeah.
So at different points in my life, I love different characters. And I would have to favorite is probably better. So right now I'm in kind of becoming the autumn of my life. So King Lear stands out to me more than any other character in the canon, only because as I look into the future and see my retirement, as King Lear did, and then knowing his journey of like temporary insanity, of being shut out by his children, all those normal fears we have as adults who are entering into that part of our life where we don't, it's the great unknown in some ways, different than Hamlet's. So like I loved Hamlet when I was younger, and I felt like, and before that I loved Romeo, when I was a young man. And then when I was in my 30s, I thought, oh, Hamlet, that's what it's all about. It's all about the equivocation of how I'm going to serve justice. But now it's Lear. I think it's one of the most well-written roles, just so crazily dynamic. Again, that character goes through so much, and in the end, redemption in some forms. One of the most complete arcs of Shakespeare's characters, when he and Cordelia are ready to go off to a cell, and he's apologized to her and begged her forgiveness after he's come back from his insanity, and he says, we'll live in this cell and we'll be together and we'll tell sweet stories of the end. And then the next scene we see, Cordelia's been hung, and Lear dies of a broken heart, which is, to me, another great device Shakespeare uses. Well, I think it's a broken heart, but maybe other people don't. I think I mentioned this in the show that we recorded earlier, but I love this device of Enobarbus and Antony and Cleopatra. After he becomes a traitor to Cleopatra and to Antony, he sits down and dies. Because he's been a general his whole life, and he's served the military his whole life. Then he does a traitor's turn, and he can do nothing else but let his heart kill him. And it's not a heart attack, it's like a broken heart. And I see that in Lear too, but a more complete, full character who just like, oh, I'm done. Yeah. So I guess Lear right now. Maybe when I get older, it'll be Polonius.
Maybe so. Well, and I do think, it's one of the reasons probably why, people think of Lear as being like one of the saddest of his plays.
Yes.
Is just because you see that journey that he goes on, and that redemption at the end makes it even just heartbreaking.
That's why I love the play so much. There's not much comedy there. The clown, the fool is not that funny. I'm very witty, and always showing the mirror to Lear, saying, this is you, Lear, this is what you've done. But yeah, it's incredibly sad. I think I produced it about 5 years ago, and my father had passed a little recently from that. And it's just it echoes in you so much, the father-child relationship we all have it, in one way or another. So I think that's my favorite character right now.
That's a good, well, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping that people take away from this class is, you don't have to read all 37 plus lost works of 40-ish of his plays, but I think that there is value to there are certain plays of Shakespeare's. I think it's good to actually read some of the less known ones, because I think you discover some fun things. But then there are certain ones like Hamlet, Lear, Othello, which it's like, you've got to read this one, you've got to check it out.
They're such timeless, and if you can't read them, but I'm sure as writers they can read them. At least watch the movie, or a good classic film of it. It's just all about the human condition, and Shakespeare did such great work at kind of drawing that out and making it universal. No matter, it's incredibly universal to me. That's why I love working on it over and over and over.
Well, and it's one of the great things about living in the day and age that we live. I was writing a fantasy story, and I've been working on it, and I've got this one character who is just evil through and through, inexplicably evil. And so what do? I watch some video clips of Iago.
Yeah.
I spend a whole evening and I just take in Iago.
Yeah. That's a great character in the sense that he's unredeemable. Even after he's been arrested at the end, he just stops talking. Why did you do this? He doesn't say a word.
I'm done.
Yeah, I love that moment. And scholars all debate about, why doesn't Iago talk anymore? It's like he's not going to recant any of his crimes. He's just pure evil, like you said, and it's possible.
And he's so good with words too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, could he have talked himself? Like, could he have talked his way out? I don't know. But at a certain point, he says, no, I am done. And so I think that writers can really get that benefit of just discovering these characters and just kind of sitting with them for a while and seeing what they discover in their own work.
I think that's a brilliant idea. And golly, even as we're talking, I'm reflecting and thinking about more and more characters in Shakespeare, like Titus Andronicus, a very early work. You know, you've got Aaron the Moor, who seems like evil incarnate, but when you think about the fact he was captured, he was a slave, and then they made him, you know, part of their army and stuff like that. And Titus is bloodthirsty as hell. He kills his sons.
Yeah.
And it's all for the house, you know, for order. So there are takeaways everywhere, I think, in Shakespeare, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Raphael Parry, thank you so much for setting aside a little bit of time. I know you've got a busy schedule, and I do want to let people know again, ShakespeareDallas.org. If you live in the Dallas area, you have to go and see a few performances at Shakespeare Dallas. You have to, because first of all, you guys have a great theater, like the outdoor theater. It is, I mean, last year I went to see the Hamlet monologues, and you know, just taking the lawn chairs, grabbing some food, some wine, sitting out there, beautiful evening, so much fun. And you guys, I think, and I don't expect you to go through the whole sales pitch, but you guys are kicking off, let's see, Midsummer's this year, and then you're also doing, is it Twelfth Night?
Well, we switched and we're doing The Tempest, Midsummer, The Tempest, and then Hamlet comes in the fall. So
yeah,
we had some huge big titles, and I totally echo you. I love the venue. It's so comfortable. You can wear a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, come out there and just enjoy Shakespeare under the stars. Bring your picnic. And the other cool thing about our venue that I find is, if you don't understand what's going on, you can lean over to your partner and say, "What's happening?" and not disturb too many people when you do that. So that's a great aspect too.
Yeah, I think people need to see Shakespeare live. I mean, YouTube's great. You can watch all your Iago videos, spend an evening doing that. But there's just something about sitting out there and just watching it out there. And for people who aren't regular theater goers, I found that the experience from the time you leave your car till you're seated down where you need to be, pretty seamless. Like there wasn't a moment where you're like, where do I go? What do I do? Like.
Good point. Yeah, it's very easy to come to our venue, which is a public park near downtown Dallas. It's 5 acres of green space. Bring your blanket. We can rent a sand chair. You can order something or have it delivered by Uber, or not Uber Eats, I guess.
Uber Eats, yeah.
That's a new trend we're seeing, where people just show up and place their order and go to the front gate and pick it up and take their picnic is delivered to them. So it's a great evening, and we'd love to see folks come out and see our shows.
Well, Raphael, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it. Let's, can't wait to see some more plays.
It's been a real pleasure, David. Thank you so much for having me.